Hey guys, welcome back to my Ableton journal. Could you hear that groove that I had in this resample chord section? The funny thing about this is that I didn't really apply any grooves when I was programming this chord sound. So there isn't any groove besides this delay that I've applied and shifted them a tad bit up and down, but it's still pretty static in my ears. The thing is that you can't really achieve what I was going for here using only MIDI, because it's not only the chord hits that are being affected by groove, but it's also the tail of this delay that we've got going on right here. And there's no real way to apply any of Ableton's MIDI grooves to live audio effects as delays, phasers, yeah, you name it really. There's just no such function that exists as of today. But the trick is that if you resample that audio that you've got going with all those effects on top, then you can use Ableton's built-in auto gate function, as some people call it. I'm not totally sure what it's called. And after you've done that, it's fully possible for us to apply a chosen set of grooves on top of this resample audio. And I've come to find that this really unlocks a lot of, just groove and aliveness in what could be described as a pretty static starting point. And grooves in Ableton are really, really great because they enable us to just inject a lot of life and groove into otherwise static audio loops. You can have static program beats, for instance. That's super common, especially for beginners and intermediates. I know I, for my own sake, didn't really think much of this when I was starting out, and it wasn't until within the last 5 or 6 years that I really started using them in a manner that sort of made sense. But you know what? I think the easiest thing here for me is just to show you exactly how you can achieve this effect, and then we can take a listen to how I've applied this effect in like a real world example. This is an actual track that I've been working on lately. Get my glasses. Okay, so before we begin, I'm just going to delete the groove I had going here just to show you exactly what the technique looks like from scratch. I created this just a kick and bass groove with the standard 909 core kit and just a 909 hi-hat. I have a small instance of hybrid reverb on top, and it sounds like this. See, nothing too crazy. And then I have set up a relatively simple patch in Meld, with just an instance of chord in front to get the classic minor chord. And it sounds a bit like this. The only thing that I've done here is I've mapped out the velocity to the filter frequency, and that's it. I like to play around with the filter when I'm adjusting the velocity of the notes. It's an easy way to inject more life into everything here. After that, I have set up a simple delay for an echo. The program I have put in looks something like this. And if you're trying to follow along, I'd advise you also just to grab some of Ableton's stock grooves. I've chosen Logic and MPC60 for this example. And if you're wondering how to find these grooves, I would just go and search for Logic. I can't spell Logic. There you go. If you find the 16th one, and just double click this, and it's going to show up in your groove pool like this. That being said, I selected the MPC 6016 Swing 55. So this is nice, it's simple, it's very, very basic. After the fact, I've put on an instance of echo, just to give it a bit more space and just to have the notes bounce around more. I'm gonna leave the feedback down for now, or very low at least. For this example, I'm gonna be using the Amazing Stereo Spring preset. This is for Ableton's impulse response, and combined with the echo, it sounds like this. So definitely, like, we're getting somewhere, but I still feel like it's a bit stale. We could also enable the phaser to create even more movement to this chord. And after you've set up all of this, you set up a new audio channel. You can just call that chord resample like I've done. Select the input from number 4 chord. I'm just going to disable that, so when playback starts again, we're not going to be hearing double up of that sound. Then you just go ahead and hit record. And for this kind of sound and for this technique, I like to record minimum 4 bars, probably around 8 bars. It could also be nice to just play around with some of the effects while it's recording. Just to have some more variations to pick from afterwards. Once we've done that, we can just hit stop on this clip right here. And then we have our resample audio. Let's take a listen to that. So, surprise, surprise, it sounds exactly like the audio that we recorded. Now, from here on out, it's just a matter of selecting any kind of take and looping that. Then I would go into the beats warp mode here, the preserve transients function. And just to tighten up the sound a bit, you can always make it bigger afterwards with reverbs and more delays. So already it's actually grooving more than when it was just this MIDI clip, even though the MIDI had already had some swing applied to it. Now what's really cool is that when we go into this audio clip again, we can then reapply, say, not necessarily the same swing, because that's just going to further accentuate and it might be too much, but you can always play around and see what you like. But let's go with the Logic 16th swing. So this is a bit quiet. So what I like to do is just to slap on an OTT and bring down the amount. Because now we're talking, now this is like actually properly swinging. So that's the basis of this technique. And also what's really, really cool about this this way of doing things is that since we're working with a stereo sample that has different information in the left and the right channel, you could theoretically, like you can go really crazy with this, and without going super deep, I could, for instance, say I only want the left channel here, and you can just pick that out with a utility. And if we listen back, we can hear that the rhythmic information in the different channels are different. And obviously that's because when we was working with the MIDI, we had 1/8 notes on one channel and 1/16 notes on the other. And with this, we could, for instance, we could duplicate this one, and you can turn this into a bass. And you do that by just pitching down the whole audio clip 12 semitones, a whole shift down arrow on your keyboard. For this, I like the 16th gated mode. I make it pretty tight. Then what I do is simply, again, an OTT just to bring up the volume and overall the density of this one. Filter it down and apply some saturator, and then all of a sudden you have a bass line. Which is born out of the chord that we're gonna be playing around with. So basically, like, everything is gonna evolve out of that single chord, and everything is also gonna sound cohesive. This is a topic that I've been talking about in my previous video about playable effects, and you can go check that out if you want more in-depth thoughts about that. But anyways, on this chord sound, let's just go to we can just hard pan this to the left. It's gonna sound a bit weird, but then if we duplicate it, go to the duplicated channel, pan that all the way to the right, and make sure okay, we're on the left channel. Yeah. Hopefully you get the idea. We can choose left here and right on the right channel. Now, if we trigger them at the same time, boom! All of a sudden, like, we have the exact same sound that we're working with. But what's really, really cool about this now is that at this point in time, we can start applying like different grooves to the left and the right channel, and we can also filter them differently and process them differently with like auto filter and phaser, and like you can go crazy with this. Let's apply phaser to this one. And what about an auto filter on the left channel? Let's go with a bandpass filter. Up the drive a bit, just to increase the volume, since we're removing so much of the frequencies. Increase the LFO. And then we can group this together and apply another phaser on top. You see where I'm getting with this? Hope you get the core idea here. So now let's take a listen to a track that I'm working on, and I can talk a bit about how I've been using this exact same effect in a proper real-life scenario. Okay, so here we are in my latest track from 3 days ago, and it sounds a bit like this. I think you get the idea. And I feel like this chord especially is interesting because I've only looped like half a bar of this pretty long loop that I got. It's originally, close to 16 loops I was aiming for. And I even went ahead and quantized all the notes, which I don't really remember why. I think I felt like the delays were already pretty loose. But anyways, I've done the exact same thing that I just mentioned. Here I have I have the Octatrack 16 swing 52, and I've just gated down the main chord about halfway. And what really creates all the movement in this otherwise static chord, if I disable all the effects, you can hear it, like just how boring this is going to be to listen to for, I don't know, 6-7 minutes straight, or whatever the length of this track is. 5.5 minutes ish. But if I do that, see, it's just going from middle, right, and left, and it's just got some reverb on it. So what really is the secret sauce in this one is the phaser. Then we have the auto pan set to tremolo. So it sort of like fades it slowly a bit in and out, and it just adds another layer of movement. After that, I've just got some EQ with the API from UAD. Shifter is not doing anything. Then I have track spacer. That is just ducking this audio to make room for this thinner chord that comes in at various times. And then it's just an auto filter. And I've done the same thing with the low chord that functions as the bassline for this track. I just got a slow phaser on it, some saturation, and another set of track spacer just to duck it out of the way when this thin chord comes in at time to create a bit of variation. But overall, I've come to find that it is all these small nuances and all these small additions of movement and groove in subtle ways that really makes up the whole feeling. Like obviously in combination with grooves in my hi-hats and shakers and taking elements in and out of the mix at times to create a sense of progression. But it is really this core concept that I've come to find it's really easy to get, and it's really easy to get really complex and interesting results with just a few clicks. One thing that I wanted to mention is that when we're on the topic of resampling audio like this, I feel like it's worth mentioning that if we think about the pioneering dub techno producers back in the early 90s, they didn't really have access to all this expensive polyphonic synths and tons of gear. Because if you think about it, they would be working with vintage samplers, limited hardware, and they would have to process all the audio that they had in creative ways to sort of achieve the sound that they got. And it's this process that the whole aesthetic that I feel like, me personally, I'm sort of chasing after that. The old vintage like Basic Channel sound, Maurizio and the likes. And they achieve this sound through sort of treating the audio itself as an instrument and not necessarily relying too much on sort of like actual instruments. Now, I'm not trying to be a dub techno historian by any means, but it's just worth thinking that if we want to try and achieve or get closer to the kind of sound they had back in the early 90s, it's valuable to try and approach this whole creative process like you would if we didn't have access to like all these synthesizers and plugins and special effects, and not to mention limitless track lists that we can have in Ableton Live. And just try and think, okay, but what if I resample this? Or like, how would they do it in the 90s? And like, definitely, I recommend you look up what kind of gear that was used in the past. You can find plugins that emulate that sound. Me personally, I found explore techniques like this and try to think differently about how I work with audio has been really just a lot of fun, not at least. Working with limitations can actually be pretty cool. And if you're not doing it already, I highly advise you just to try and strip back all the elements you've got in a track and try to think of in what ways can you get as much groove and life into as few elements as possible. And for me personally, I've come to find that this has been a creatively interesting and just overall a really rewarding experience that continues to inspire me and experiment more and further develop my own sound. So with all of this being said, like I've said a lot of words in this video, and hopefully I've been able to get my point across about the technique. Again, if you have any questions about the whole process I've just been through, if you're curious to know more about working track that I've showed you here today, or if there's anything else you're curious about, just let me know in the comments and I'll reply as soon as I see your comment. Okay, lastly, I am currently offering one-on-one Ableton Live coaching for intermediate to advanced producers who wants to try and level up their skills, overcome creative roadblocks, or if you're having mindset issues, you're stuck in these thought loops that you can't really get out of, definitely I can help you. If that sounds interesting, I'll leave a link with more information at the very bottom of this video. Thanks a lot for watching. If you got anything out of this video, I would highly appreciate it if you could give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions, let me know. And if not, I'll just see you in the next video.